It's the first Monday of the month, and that means there is a new kit from Hero Arts. Hi everyone, I'm Yana Smakula, and I'm hoping you love this video. If you do, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Ring the bell too to be notified of every new upload. A couple years ago, I was invited to a very fancy birthday party with the Art Deco theme. I didn't know about the Art Deco style prior to that event, and I was so incredibly impressed once I had learned a bit more about it. Needless to say, this style has become one of my favorite styles in architecture and also paper crafting. Whenever a craft company releases an Art Deco inspired product, I get very giddy and I can't wait to get my hands on it and play. Well, this month kit from Hero Arts is just that, perfect for anything and everything Art Deco, from party invitations to birthday cards and beyond. To me, Art Deco style is all about the bling. So in the cards I have for you today, I'm using tons of glitter, lots of sparkle, and beautiful textures. I have already started working on my first card. My idea is to use this stencil, it's actually a part of the kit, and create a rich gold glitter background on black cardstock. I have taped the stencil to a piece of black cardstock cut to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, and it's going to make the front of my card. I also have a protective mat from Tonic Studios on my desk. The idea is to apply paste through the stencil and cover it with gold glitter embossing powder to create dimensional textured background. I'm using modeling paste from the Crafter's Workshop, and this paste is available in the Hero Arts store, so you can grab it with your kit if you like. Or you can use any other texture paste that you might already have in your stash. I'm applying a rather thick coat of this paste using a palette knife onto my background. I am trying to work quickly, but I'm not rushing here. I'm also not leaving my work unattended, as this paste, once it is dry, becomes very, very hard. So I'm trying to work quickly to apply the paste all over the background. Once I have an even coverage, I'm going to put the remainder of the paste that I have on my palette knife back into the jar, remove the stencil, and I'm trying to be very, very careful here and not mess up my background. I've transferred my background piece onto another piece of printer paper, just regular paper that I use for pouring embossing powder and things like that. And now I can take the mat, along with the stencil and the spatula, to the sink and wash them quickly before the paste becomes dry. I am back now. I've washed my tools and they are drying. While the paste is still wet on my background, I'm going to generously coat it with the Hero Arts Gold Glitter Embossing Powder. This, I feel, is the perfect product for the Art Deco style cards and invitations. You do use quite a bit of it, but the result, I think, is very worth it. If you plan on making a bunch of invitations or cards using this technique, you can also try using regular gold glitter here, not the embossing powder. It should stick to the paste as well. Once my background was covered with embossing powder, I set it aside to dry and I kept on working on other cards. But to make it less confusing in my video, I'm going to show you each card from start to finish to make it easier for you to follow. But do remember to set your background aside to dry for at least half an hour, maybe longer, depending on how thick of a paste coat you have applied onto your paper. Next, I brought in my heat tool and I started heating up the background to melt the embossing powder. Now, because this powder has a lot of glitter in it, it's ideal to heat it up from the back of the paper so that the glitter doesn't come flying everywhere. This typically works if you are embossing it using just embossing ink and not putting a thick coat of paste underneath it like I have here. This wasn't really working here for me, as I did have that pretty thick layer of that paste, and I would have had to first heat up the paste and then melt the powder if I was to heat everything from the back. I ended up switching things up and heating this background from the front to melt the powder. A word of caution, this is glitter embossing powder, so be prepared to have messy glittery desk. I was trying to be very careful, but I still ended up having glitter everywhere, including glitter on my cats. I did have paste seep under the stencil in a few sections, and that ended up looking white and kind of unappealing on my background. I also had some stray embossing powder particles here and there because I did not use an anti-static powder tool on my background. And to fix that, I used my black Copic marker and I simply colored those odd areas black. You don't need to use a Copic marker specifically. Any permanent black marker will do for this. It's an easy trick and I use it all the time. I'm sorry my camera was mostly focusing on my hand and not on the background, but hopefully you can see what I'm talking about here. Next, to create a sentiment for this card, well, actually it's a party invitation, so to create the title, I cut a piece of black cardstock to about 3.5 inches square. I wanted to add some heat embossing on there, but diagonally, if that makes sense. I picked a few images, some design elements, and sentiments from this stamp set. It's included in the kit, and I started arranging them on my panel using the corner and the rulers of my Mini Misty stamping tool as a guide. This was very helpful to arrange everything evenly on the panel. Once I had it how I wanted it, I closed the door of my Misty to pick up the stamps. I treated the paper with an anti-static powder tool, and then I inked up my stamps with clear embossing ink. I stamped them in the corner. Next, I flipped my paper 180 degrees, and I stamped identical images in the opposite corner of the panel to create a mirrored design. This was very easy to do because I was using a Misty tool. If you don't have a Misty tool, you can still stamp the same image or the same design using a clear block. You just have to be a little bit more careful and pay more attention to the image alignment. To heat emboss this, I used gold embossing powder. I covered the panel with the powder and heat set it using my heat tool to melt it in place. I also wanted to add additional elements here. And because it was easier to stamp those a clear block, I just mounted the images that I wanted on the block and stamped on the panel. I added a vintage car in that area in the center. It was the perfect size to house that car image. I was actually debating if I should use gold glitter embossing powder to match the background or regular gold embossing powder to go with the rest of the embossing on this panel. I ended up going with a regular gold, and I also stamped another design element in the two corners and added gold embossing powder to complete this piece. You might notice that I had another background on my desk at the time. I was actually planning to use this panel on a different card with a different heat embossed background, but once I had finished making this piece, I realized that it goes really well with my gold glitter texture background on black cardstock. I used my pencil eraser to remove the anti-static powder that was still sitting on my panel and was giving it that cloudy finish, preventing the paper from looking true black. Next, I covered a piece of fun foam with double-sided tape and used it to adhere my panel onto the background. I used purple foam here as I have loads and loads and loads of colored fun foam in my stash, and I'm trying to use it all up before I get any white fun foam. And also, because this card is made using black paper, for the most part, the purple foam is not going to be visible there. Nobody's going to see it. So it was okay to use it. As you can see, I actually first adhered it upside down on my card, but I noticed it in time to be able to fix it. I also used my scissors and trimmed the corners that were going outside the edge of this card. Lastly, I used some gold and black confetti pieces from my kit to embellish this card. As always, I adhered them in place using my Tonic Studios Deluxe adhesive and my Crystal Katana tool, which is super helpful for picking up small embellishments like these. This card is done, and here is a close-up photo of that texture and dimension that I have in the background, thanks to all of the paste and glitter embossing powder. My next project is also a party invitation, but this time done mostly in white. Here I'm using the Deco Flourish Bold Prints background stamp. This is an add-on stamp this month. And by the way, you can get, in addition to your kit, you can get lots of different add-ons and they can ship together with the kit at no additional cost. You just need to order them, I think, by Thursday after the kit launch in the Hero Arts store. I have links to all of the products that I'm using today in my video description and also in the blog post that is associated with this video. So be sure to check the links if you're looking to purchase a specific product I'm featuring in this video. I'm going to heat emboss this background on white cardstock. I've treated my paper with an anti-static powder. I've inked up the stamp with clear embossing ink, and now I'm stamping it on the background. For heat embossing, I'm using gold embossing powder once again, and I used it pretty much for all of my projects today. I'm actually running low on this powder, so I also tried using brass embossing powder, again from Hero Arts, for some of the cards, but gold looked so much better for these projects. I used my heat tool and heat set the powder to melt it. To create a sentiment for this project, I used several word stamps and design elements from the stamp set from my kit. My idea was to heat emboss them in gold and also stamp in black for some contrast. I also wanted to partially trim this panel so you'll see that I have everything aligned to the left and it is not centered. This is because I will be trimming the right-hand side portion of this panel off. Here is where I used the brass embossing powder. I wish I had used gold, but I think it ended up looking okay in the end. I stamped the sentiments in black ink and I covered them with clear embossing powder to give them a shiny finish as well. I didn't really want them to look matte on this card. After all, it's Art Deco. Everything needs to have some shine to it. I finished recreating the bottom portion of this panel and I made it a mirror reflection of the images at the top. Here you can see how shiny everything is. I love it. Once I finished my panel, I took it to my paper trimmer and trimmed it to be a better fit for this card design. It ended up being approximately 3 3/8 of an inch by a little less than 3 1/4 inches. I adhered my embossed background onto an A2 white side folding card base, and then I foam mounted this panel over it. I also scattered a bunch of black and gold confetti around the card to give it some movement. To me, these tiny confetti pieces look like people at the party. They are dancing, they are mingling with a crowd, and just having the time of their life. Here's a close-up of this party invitation. I really love the way it turned out. For my next card, I went back to the modeling paste and the gold glitter embossing powder. This time I used a different stencil. This is an add-on this month called Graphic Deco Stencil. I didn't add any paste in the center section of my panel as I was planning to cover it with another panel anyway. You can see my hands have gotten all glittery at this point, and I also had glitter all over my work surface. But hey, who doesn't like glitter? I didn't show this on video, but I also let this background sit for about half an hour, and then I heat set and melted the powder with my heat tool. To create a focal point for this card, I gold heat embossed several images from the stamp set in my kit. I have it saying, "Have a roaring good time." Next, there's a couple dancing, and another sentiment that reads, "Kick up your heels," and finally a design element. This month's stamp set has a lot of design elements like this, and I love it. This lets you really stretch your stamps and get many different variations. Now, I didn't color any of my images today, but you can of course add some coloring to the outline images included in this stamp set, like that couple that's dancing. I just felt like having them embossed in pretty embossing powder was sufficient. Plus, it was nice to skip doing the coloring for once. Sometimes I feel like I'm doing way too much coloring for my cards. The image of the couple dancing didn't emboss perfectly, so I just re-stamped it using my MISTI. Luckily, I still had the images inside my MISTI tool. I covered them with a gold embossing powder and heat set the powder again to fix the issue. Next, I adhered my background onto an A2 white side folding card. I foam mounted my panel in the center, and I was actually thinking about shifting it to one side or the other, but the center worked best, and then I added several black and gold confetti scattered around the main panel. I loved using these confetti pieces. They are perfectly flat and thus they do not add any bulk to your cards whatsoever. Not that any of my cards are flat today. All of them have a little bit of dimension to them. Some of the elements are popped up, but if you plan on making one layer cards, these confetti pieces are perfect no bulk embellishments. Here's a closer look at this card. It turned out really great as well. For my last card for today, I decided to skip adding a ton of bulk and just do a simple but pretty background. I stamped the Deco in the City bold prints background stamp. This is an add-on this month. I stamped it in clear embossing ink and covered the background with, you would be surprised, gold glitter embossing powder. I have never tried using this embossing powder for a solid background like this, and I wasn't sure if that would work, but it did, and it gave me the most beautiful, no dimension background. Very pretty, and this just ended up looking like a pre-printed glitter piece, and the glitter doesn't even come off. It actually looks like some fancy specialty Art Deco paper. Super cool. I kept the rest of this card very simple, and once again, I only embossed an image and a sentiment from my stamp set from the kit. I used gold glitter embossing powder for that once again. After trimming it down, I foam mounted it onto the card and added same confetti pieces to dress this card up. I hope you'll give ideas I shared in this video a try. If you do, remember to share online and tag me. I always love seeing what you guys are making. On the screen, there is the link to another video that you might like to watch after this one. Subscribe now not to miss any new card making videos. Love you guys. I'll see you next week.